In complete silence, through the darkness, a rhythm sounded, simple, almost childish. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. As if someone were learning to dance. But this was in hell. There are people who believe that after death, we are met by light. There are those who think that darkness awaits, and there are also those who believe in nothing at all. Thomas Marrow belonged to the last group, a scientist, a philosopher, a reader of Nietzsche and Derrida. But when his heart stopped, he did not fade into nothingness. He fell onto a dark stage where a metronome ticked and someone's dancing steps echoed. That was where it all began. Thomas Marrow was born in 1967 in Berkeley, California. His parents were professors. His mother taught literature, his father physics. Thomas's childhood was spent among books, debates, and contemplation. From a young age, he rejected religion, considering it an archaic tool of power designed to suppress free thought. By the age of 16, he had already written an article titled, "God is Dead, but No One Buried Him," which caused a scandal in the local newspaper. As an adult, Thomas became a professor of philosophy and semiotics. His lectures drew packed audiences, and his books circulated widely in academic circles. He spoke of post-mortem emptiness, the idea that when a person dies, everything simply vanishes. There was no soul, no heaven, no hell, only the decay of matter. His students recalled that he spoke of death with a faint smirk, as if it were something trivial. But he had a secret. When he turned 40, he was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease that was slowly destroying his heart. He knew his time was limited, but he confessed this to no one except his journal. He didn't want pity. He wanted to be remembered as strong and unshaken. "Death is the final truth," he wrote. "It requires no commentary." Yet in June 2022, after one of his lectures, he collapsed right at the lectern. His heart gave out. Despite the medic's efforts, he was pronounced dead 14 minutes later. But for Thomas, everything was only beginning. He did not disappear. He did not dissolve. His consciousness did not fade as he had expected. Instead, it sharpened. He felt himself detached from his body, and for a brief moment saw the hall where panicked students were calling for help. Then everything vanished. He found himself in blackness. No horizon, no stars, no shapes, but with a rhythm. Precise, constant, relentless. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It wasn't a sound. It was a state, pulsing through his very essence. He didn't know how long he had been in this space, but he knew one thing. This was not emptiness. This was something else. At first, he tried to analyze what was happening. If this is a projection of my consciousness, why is it so structured? He asked himself. He thought it might be the hallucinations of a dying brain. But the further he walked, though he had no legs, no path, the more he understood. This was no illusion. At some point, a silhouette appeared before him. It had no features, only an outline, like a shadow cast by a spotlight. The silhouette moved, and Thomas realized it was dancing, precise, measured, painfully graceful. Every motion carried an echo of pain. Every step felt like a jury's verdict. He sensed that this dance held a story. Then came light, not from outside, but as if emanating from the very fabric of the space itself. And he understood. He was not alone. He was being watched, not to be judged, but to be shown something. But what? Thomas had always believed everything could be explained. But here, in this rhythmic nightmare, He faced something beyond analysis. He could no longer separate his self from his surroundings. Everything was one, and in that unity, there was pain, not physical, but spiritual. He felt his thoughts unraveling like a projection on a screen, and everything he had ever denied was now manifesting as metaphor, as image, as movement. And then he understood. He had died, and he had not entered emptiness. He had entered a space where every lie he had ever believed became reality, a space where the dance was the verdict. With each beat, the music grew louder, the steps quickened, and among the shadows, he began to recognize familiar shapes. One silhouette danced differently, not like the others. It was not suffering. It was smiling. But the smile was terrifying, distorted, a mask. This silhouette began to glow with a faint blue light, like a hologram from an old television. And then Thomas recognized him. Unbelievably, he knew. Michael Jackson, or rather what remained of him. A face stripped of fame, of the stage, of fans. A dancer without an audience. A prophet without a gospel. A king whose kingdom was now a hall of shadows. But Thomas did not yet know. This was only the beginning. Thomas stood, if it could even be called standing, in a space devoid of any foundation, where there was neither sky nor earth. Everything felt compressed between past and future, a place where time did not flow, but trembled like a taut string. His thoughts moved sluggishly, as if through thick liquid, and each one echoed somewhere outside of him. He felt something watching him, not a creature, rather the very structure of this world itself, as if the walls were not made of stone, but of intention. They breathed, quivered, reacted to his inner state. If he thought of fear, the space grew tighter. If he tried to recall love, something resembling light flickered around him, only to vanish instantly, as if the feeling had not been sincere enough. Sounds continued to reach him. But now it wasn't just rhythm. They were fragments of voices, confessions of strangers, broken oaths, words of forgiveness, and pleas trapped in eternity. It was like an audio tape recording everything people had ever uttered in despair. Thomas began to distinguish individual voices, women, men, children. Some whispered his name. He sensed movement, at first faint, then stronger. Not his own, someone else's. As if someone were walking beside him, not on solid ground, but through the layers of his memory. Faces he had once known, students, colleagues, his mother. They all passed through him like projections on a curtain. He realized these were not memories. This was judgment, not someone judging him, but himself, through the unflinching honesty of his own recollections. In the distance, the shape of a door appeared. It did not glow, did not beckon. If anything, it repelled. There was no handle, only a pattern resembling the symbol of infinity looped into a circle. And he knew. If he passed through it, the real trial would begin. He was pulled inside effortlessly. The door dissolved as if breathing, letting him through. He stepped into a space resembling a theater stage, but without actors. Everything here was scorched by time. The wings were made of shadow, the floor of tears. The audience, empty chairs occupied by puppets with human-like faces. This was the theater of life, but without a script. At the center of the stage stood a microphone, black, vintage. It pulsed like a beacon, inviting him. Thomas approached, not because he wanted to, because he couldn't resist. He took the microphone and heard his own voice. I'm here, but why? At that moment, the rhythm returned. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then from the depths of the stage, he emerged. Michael, but not the one from television. This one was different, as if Michael Jackson had stripped away every mask, leaving only his essence. He was dressed in black. His movements were fragile, yet precise. He wasn't dancing. He was confessing through motion. His eyes had no pupils, only light and void. His whole body seemed to vibrate with pain, beauty, and something beyond explanation. He stopped in front of Thomas. A meter separated them, but that meter stretched into eternity. The music faded. Only the rhythm remained, internal, inaudible, yet undeniably real. Then Michael spoke. His voice was not a voice, but a chord woven from guilt, sorrow, and hope. You are not here because you were wicked. You are here because you refused to feel, he said. You feared love. You laughed at those who believed. And I spent my life dancing for a world that wanted spectacle, not a soul. Thomas could not reply, because he understood. Hell was not fire. Hell was a stage where everyone was forced to perform what they had refused to acknowledge in life. Michael turned and took the first step away from the stage. His movements were not a dance, but a ritual. With each step, Thomas felt the space around them shift. The air grew thicker, as if he were breathing underwater, saturated with ash. The world no longer resembled a stage. It had transformed into something far older, far more fundamental. It was a labyrinth, not an architectural one, a spiritual one. Walls that moved when you looked away. No ceiling, only an endless void looming above them. They walked down a corridor where it was impossible to see ahead, only to remember what lay behind. Because every step led to a memory. And this was the punishment, to walk through one's own life not as an observer, but as the accused. Thomas heard his own words, spoken decades ago. How he had laughed at his mother when she prayed in desperation at his father's hospital bed. How, during lectures, he had contemptuously dismissed any mention of faith, calling religion morphine for weak minds. How he had left a woman who loved him because he believed emotions were chemical illusions. Here, Michael said, stopping. His face was distorted, not with anger, not with pain, but with knowing. He pointed to a mirror, but Thomas did not see himself in it. He saw a lecture hall, full of students. He stood at the podium, delivering a lecture. But everything was different. Every argument he made cut like a knife. Words honed by logic had become weapons with which he murdered hope. Michael placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You thought your sharpness was strength, but you never listened. You only spoke. And then came the scream. Not loud, not panicked, but endless. Hundreds of voices crying out in loneliness. Thomas heard them, people he had once convinced that life was absurd, love a fiction, and death liberation. He wanted to turn away, but the mirror followed him. Michael led him onward. The walls closed in. Now they were made of books. Every book he had ever written. Their pages shifted like skin. And from each came Thomas's own voice. Only now he understood how hollow his musings on the supremacy of reason over faith had truly been. Here, they do not punish with pain, Michael whispered. Here, they let you see the truth. Suddenly, a circular hall opened before them. Its walls were organic tissue. The ceiling, a pulsing membrane. At the center stood a vast stage where countless figures moved in repetition. They were dancing, slowly, mechanically, without meaning. These are the ones who spent their lives hiding behind masks. They chose rhythm over truth, and now they dance forever, Michael said. Thomas recognized some of them. Old philosophers, famous atheists, even a former president. They were no longer individuals, but marionettes, performing their final thoughts like incantations. Their bodies moved, but their faces remained frozen, like tragic theater masks. And you, Thomas, Michael said, were neither worse nor better. You did not kill, but you did not love, did not empathize. You climbed a tower of reason and destroyed the human within yourself. Thomas did not try to justify himself. For the first time in his life, he fell silent. He felt the world around him breathing with his own fear. He understood now. Hell was not pain. It was absolute self-knowledge, without embellishment, without self-deception, without the chance to forget. A familiar melody began to play in the hall, an echo of Billie Jean, distorted, slowed, almost mournful. And then Michael began to dance again. His movements became inevitable, like a verdict. It was the dance of confession, the dance of a prophet who had lost his followers, the dance of a god exiled from his own paradise. Dancing is how you remain yourself, even in hell, he said. But you do not know how to dance, Thomas. You must learn. And then Thomas realized he could not leave. He had to move, repeat, understand, until every thought became an action, until every belief manifested in his body, until meaning emerged, but meaning did not come. Why you? Thomas finally asked, watching as the figure before him glided effortlessly across the stage, as if time itself obeyed his movements. Why am I seeing you? Michael stopped. His face was distorted, almost childlike, like a puppet's mask with a perpetual smile. But his eyes, they were alive, strangely alive, deep, human. Because you didn't come for forgiveness, he answered. You came for truth. And truth is a dance, an endless movement between pain and beauty. And who better to show you that than me? Thomas wanted to argue. In his rational mind, the name Michael Jackson meant nothing but pop culture, noise, and scandals. But here, in this place, everything was different. Michael wasn't a celebrity. He was a symbol. And the longer Thomas looked at him, the more he understood. Before him stood a soul torn between light and darkness. When you dance, Michael continued, you cannot lie. The body betrays everything you've hidden. Every step you take here is a memory, every movement, a confession. He stepped closer. You spent your life claiming truth doesn't exist, that everything is interpretation. But interpret this. And he reached out to Thomas. Thomas touched his palm and instantly fell through. He found himself in a room, white, sterile, empty save for one object, an old microphone standing on a stage surrounded by mirrors. In every reflection, himself, but not as he was, as others had seen him. In one, arrogant. In another, pitiful. In yet another, terrifying in his coldness. This is what you left behind, Michael's voice said. No books, no text, only reflections, only how you made others feel. And you? Thomas asked. What did you leave? Me? Michael laughed, but sadly. I left to dance, not for others. For myself, to keep from dying inside, to be free, if only for a moment, from pain, from the past, from guilt. I became a symbol, and that was my prison. He lifted his head, and in his eyes flickered the pain of 1,000 applauding crowds turned to silence. Everyone thought I was happy. Everyone believed the mask, but inside I was already burning, not from fire, from loneliness. I built a palace of fame and became its prisoner. Thomas said nothing. This wasn't a dialogue between two men, but between two concepts: reason and feeling, shadow and light, knowledge and art. And now you're here too, Michael continued, because you rejected beauty. You chose control. And hell is where everything you denied becomes your only reality. Thomas looked around. The stage was gone. Only emptiness remained. Just him and Michael. What do you want me to understand? Michael stepped so close their foreheads nearly touched. That truth isn't an idea. It's movement. That dance is closer to God than prayer. That music is an escape. It's a path. That the soul doesn't think. It sounds. And if you never listen to it in life, you'll have to listen to it here. Forever. He turned away. Began to dance again. Listen, he whispered. Not with your head. Not with logic. With your body. And Thomas heard it. First, just noise. Then, a beat. Then, a rhythm. Then, a weeping. The voices of his mother, his students, his lover, his own. All merging into one. It wasn't music. It was a chorus of fate. He understood. All those years rejecting faith, he had forgotten wonder, forgotten movement, forgotten the possibility of being not right, but alive. This is your hell, Thomas, Michael said, dissolving into the dance. Not because you were wicked, because you never let yourself be vulnerable, never let yourself sing. Alone, Thomas stood. His legs trembled. But he took the first step. He didn't know where, but he knew this. He would no longer stand still. The stage vanished. Only emptiness remained, thick, ink-like. Thomas stood within it, as if inside his own soul. He didn't know for how long. Time held no meaning here. He was alone. Or perhaps not. Somewhere in the depths, a voice emerged. But not Michael's. It was his own voice. A whisper turned into a scream. Recordings of his lectures, diary entries, debates. He heard himself saying, God is a cultural construct, nothing more. Hell is a shepherd's invention born from the fear of death. Consciousness is merely a neural impulse. And these words tore through the space around him like blades. But now they sounded different, without arrogance, without intellectual bravado. They sounded hollow, unanchored, like a child's cry behind an adult's mask. You claimed truth was an abstraction, spoke an unfamiliar voice, yet you lived as if you were truth itself. A figure emerged from the darkness, not a person, but a copy of Thomas himself. Dressed in an academic robe, its eyes devoid of pupils, it stood like a statue, yet spoke. You killed faith in the hearts of many. But the worst part? You killed it in yourself. Slowly, methodically, like a surgeon. But you forgot. Even a surgeon cannot cut out a soul. Thomas didn't answer. He felt it. The time had come. You wanted to understand death, said the double, then truly die. And then it began. Scenes from his life appeared around him. Not chronologically, but torn from context like fragments of dreams. Here he was, screaming at his father, accusing him of weakness. Here he was, rejecting a woman's love because it was irrational. Here he was, staring into a mirror, declaring, I am my own God. But now he didn't just see. He felt the pain he had caused. Not deliberately, but through his coldness. He understood. Every logical argument had been armor, and that armor had cut others. He began to speak, first in a whisper, then louder. I was afraid. All my life, I feared that faith was weakness. I believed emotions made a person vulnerable. And to be vulnerable was to be dependent. And I wanted to be free. The scenes dissolved. Only he remained. I was wrong, he said. Freedom isn't in denial. It's an acceptance. I didn't reject God. I rejected the fear of being nothing. And so I became nothing. As if in response to his confession, Michael reappeared. He wasn't dancing now. He simply stood there. His face was no longer a mask. It was tired. To accept pain isn't to surrender to it, he said. It's to admit you're alive. And as long as you admit it, you're not alone. I'm afraid, Thomas said. Good, Michael replied, because fear means you can still change. But can anything even be changed here? Whatever you do here isn't for you. It's for them. Michael waved his hand, and figures materialized in the void. His former students, his mother, the woman he had loved, all those still on earth. They were asleep, but shadows flickered in their dreams. And in those shadows was him, Thomas. Hell isn't just punishment. It's an echo. You still resonate in their memory. And what you say here will ripple there. Thomas closed his eyes. He felt heat, first inside, then outside. The space around him ignited, not with fire, as in fairy tales, but with light, painfully blinding. It was as if something within him was burning. It was his lies, his falsehoods. They burned away, leaving only ash. And beneath that ash, a seed, something new, born from pain. He began to speak, not with words, with thought, vibration, dance. I was wrong. Forgive me, not for disbelieving, but for calling faith weakness, for failing to see beauty in what cannot be explained. And at that moment, he wept, not physically, with his soul. Tears streamed through the darkness, and they didn't fall into emptiness. They fell onto the faces of those he had left behind. And somewhere, on earth, in reality, a woman smiled in her sleep. A student awoke with a lighter heart. A mother felt warmth radiating from nowhere. You've begun the journey, Michael said. Now you must choose. What choice? To stay and become a voice, or to leave and begin anew. And you? I am the eternal dancer. I don't get to choose. I became a symbol. And symbols don't die. They just resonate in the dark. They embraced, without words, without grandeur, simply as two souls who had met in hell and realized hell isn't the end. It's a mirror and dance. The path through the reflection. The light faded. Thomas stood at the edge. Before him stood no gate, no staircase, no tunnel, only a smooth surface, like a mirror or a thin film beyond which lay the world. His world, earth, people, time. He felt it. He had no body, yet he had a choice. If I return, I won't be able to fix everything, he said. Fixing isn't your purpose, answered Michael's voice, now dissolved into the air. You're not a messiah. You're human. That's enough. But I'm dead? Being dead isn't the same as being gone. Death is a boundary, but some learn to speak even beyond it. Thomas reached toward the mirrored surface. It trembled like water. And suddenly, he saw himself in a hospital room, lying on a bed, hooked to machines, in a coma, but alive. Can I go back? You can leave a mark, and that will be enough. He didn't remember returning to his body, but he woke, not all at once, gradually. First, the weight, then the pain, then his mother's weeping. She sat beside him. He heard her whisper, "You're here. You're with us." His hands trembled. His voice was weak, but his mind clear, and most importantly, new. He was no longer afraid. Months passed. Thomas never fully recovered. He couldn't lecture as he once had. He spoke slowly, often forgetting words, but he began to write. Not philosophical treatises, not academic papers. He began to write stories about a scholar who died and saw not emptiness, but a space of dance. about how hell isn't fire, but a reflection, about how even a symbol like Michael Jackson could become a mirror if you looked inward, not outward. The stories spread strangely. First, anonymously. Then, like wildfire, students, monks, critics read them. Some laughed, some wept, some felt understood for the first time in years. One day, a student approached him. "Professor," he said, "is it true? Did you really go there?" Thomas smiled, slowly, quietly. "I'll say this. I was in a place where silence answers in rhythm, where everything you deny becomes a dance." "And you saw Michael Jackson?" Thomas nodded. "I saw a man who became a symbol, and then a soul that the symbol burned. I saw what happens when you try to be a god, and how pain can turn into a song." A video about these stories appeared on YouTube. A voiceover narrated without names how a philosopher had died, gone to hell, and met the dancing ghost of the king of pop. The voice said, "Hell isn't punishment. It's an echo, that every action casts a shadow, that what we deny will one day stare back at us in the dark." Millions watched. People argued. Some called it madness. Others, genius. Others still, fiction. But every comment shared something in common. They said, "I've always felt there was something beyond. This story changed me. I didn't believe in the soul. Now, I'm not sure." And beneath every video, one line: "Truth is a dance. Don't be afraid to hear the music. You don't have to believe. That's fine." Thomas didn't either. He was rational. He was logical. He was dead. But he came back. Not to prove anything. To tell. Because sometimes, even hell isn't punishment. It's a chance. A chance to look inward. A chance to hear yourself. And maybe, if you listen, you'll hear it too. The dance, the steps, tick-tock, the rhythm. It's inside you. Always has been. If you heard the music, subscribe. We have more stories. From the dark, from the light, from what lies between. Timeless religious stories.